Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly, very quietly, into the most delicate, high pressure job you never applied for, but somehow can't escape from royal tutor. Imagine being the human version of a combination babysitter, philosopher, etiquette coach, food taster, therapist, and occasional hostage. Except your student wears gold thread sandals, believes they're descended from the sun, and has the power to get you exiled to a scorpion pit for mispronouncing a vowel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the palace before dawn, because the child wakes up at dawn, not because they like it, just because the sun apparently rises and then screams directly into their face. You were hoping for a gentle start, maybe some warm bread, a quiet review of hieroglyphs. Instead, you're met with an entourage of yawning servants, three goats in the hallway for reasons no one explains, and the unmistakable sound of your young pupil hurling their linen blanket across the room while declaring the gods unfair for making mornings legal. Welcome to the royal nursery. It's less a sanctuary of learning and more like an elaborate trap built out of ivory chaos and a truly disturbing number of dolls carved from lapis lazuli. The air smells like expensive oils, spoiled figs, and the deep sigh of every teacher who came before you. And yet your job begins not with lessons, but with the most sacred task of the day, surviving the royal bedtime in reverse. Yes, you heard that right, because last night the child did not sleep. Not really. They rested while demanding stories about their ancestors' glorious victories, insisting that each story involved more monsters, more blood, and preferably at least one exploding pyramid. You tried to wrap it up gently with a moral about balance and wisdom. The prince responded by pelting you with a stuffed ibis and yelling, "Boring!" So now, as the sun breaks through the pearl inlaid shutters, you're on hour 20 of royal attention duty. And bedtime? It's still in effect, because if the child didn't sleep, you're not really allowed to wake them until they declare themselves emotionally aligned with Ra's sunrise, which is either at 6:02 or 11:47, depending on the level of dramatic flair. You approach the bed, a gilded monstrosity the size of a chariot garage, armed with today's tools: a scroll of beginner astronomy, two honeyed figs, and a small carved lion puppet you once used in a desperate moment of storytelling panic. The child glares at you from a nest of silk and entitlement. Teach me something new, they whisper, or I shall feed you to the crocodiles. You think they're joking. You hope they're joking. But the last tutor didn't laugh, and he now teaches arithmetic to bricks on the outer wall. So you clear your throat and begin. Did you know, young one, that stars are the sky's version of candlelight? Ancient scholars believed that each flicker was a soul watching over us. Some even thought they whispered advice to rulers. This is your opening move, gentle, majestic, and factually adapted for maximum wonder. A mainstream fact, polished with sparkle. You pray it works. The child yawns. Do the stars whisper anything interesting? You nod solemnly. They say rulers must learn twice as much as they command. Otherwise, they risk ruling nothing at all. It's risky. That's almost wisdom. The child blinks. You sound like a goat. You take it as a compliment because they're still listening. And then comes the ritual. Every morning, every single morning, The child insists on inspecting your sleep first. Yes, your dreams. They believe dreams are divine messages, and as their tutor, your unconscious is their personal telegram from the gods. You make up something vague, floating down the Nile on a banana leaf, chased by papyrus scrolls that whispered algebra. The prince nods thoughtfully. That's prophetic, they say, and also deeply stupid. I like it. You've passed the first test. Just in time for the breakfast gong to sound, which doesn't mean breakfast, of course. It means breakfast prelude, which means you have to recite 5 approved affirmations to the young heir about how full their mind is and how perfectly shaped their ears are. This is required by protocol. By the time you finish the last affirmation, something about divinely curved nostrils, the child is giggling, the staff is sighing in relief, and you haven't been fired yet. And you haven't even gotten to the first actual lesson. Historians still argue whether tutors were chosen more for their intellect or their pain tolerance. But you suspect it's both, and also whether they can keep a straight face while praising a child's spelling of cabbage as cabbage. Still, this is the job. You're the royal tutor. Your day starts with a child king and ends, if you're lucky, not in a sarcophagus. And tomorrow, you do it all again, with different affirmations. You think, perhaps foolishly, that now the real teaching begins. The child is seated. The honeyed fig has been devoured. Their fingers are only moderately sticky. You've survived the sacred rituals of wakefulness. But here's what no scroll tells you. There is no standard curriculum for royal tutors. No checklist. No standardized exams. No helpful guidebook titled How to Educate a Semi-Divine Tyrant Without Getting Exiled. Your lesson plan is a rough cocktail of arithmetic, poetry, astrology, war tactics, bird calls, and the occasional moral parable involving jackals. You're not just educating a child, you're training a living deity in waiting to someday sit on the throne and command floods, armies, and a population that deeply resents taxation. So, what do you teach? You start with writing, because literacy is power. You unroll a fresh scroll, hand the child a reed pen dipped in soot ink, and begin tracing simple glyphs. You demonstrate the symbol for Ka, the soul. It's beautiful, elegant. The child draws a hippo. You try again. This time, Mat, truth, balance, order. They draw a stick figure stabbing another stick figure and label it Uncle Anctifi. You don't ask. You don't want to know. You smile. Excellent use of symmetry, because Rule 1, never criticize royal creativity, especially if it involves blood, family members, or dreams of conquest. You pivot. Perhaps mathematics will go better. You propose a scenario. If your army has 100 chariots and each requires 4 wheels, how many wheels do you need? The child frowns. None. I'll just take the wheels from Uncle Anctifi. Again with Anctifi. You nod thoughtfully. An innovative logistical approach. Economical. Cutthroat. Inspiring. Historians still debate whether tutors were complicit in royal cruelty or merely trying to survive a job that involved sharpening swords and wits. You decide to try storytelling. Stories are safe, right? Wrong. Because every parable ends with, and then the clever prince beheaded the enemy and ruled forever. Even the boy and the donkey somehow ends in conquest. But you persist. Today's story is about a humble farmer who outwits a greedy merchant using clever riddles. Midway through, the child interrupts. Why didn't the farmer just have the merchant thrown into the crocodile pit? Well, you say, the story teaches That wit is mightier than muscle. They blink. Then the merchant should have eaten the farmer. Problem solved. You realize you're not teaching morals. You're managing divine expectations. This child believes they are Ra's earthly cousin, born with authority coded into their blood. And yet, your secret, whispered mandate from the vizier is clear. Teach them to pretend to be humble. You see, humility is fashionable this dynasty. The last pharaoh's downfall came after commissioning a temple shaped like his own face. Twice. The people rioted. The granaries burned. This new reign wants relatable divinity. Think man of the people, but still seated on a solid gold throne. So you must teach the unteachable how to fake modesty while believing you are a living God. This is your forbidden curriculum, your secret syllabus. Today, that means practicing empathy through role play. You suggest a game. Pretend you're a peasant named Ku who has lost his donkey. How would you feel? The child wrinkles their nose. Hungry? No, try to imagine grief, sadness, regret. I just get another donkey. You lean in. But Ku can't afford another one. The child squints. Why would he be poor? That's gross. It's an uphill battle. Still, you persist, because somewhere beneath the layers of sandalwood perfume, royal entitlement, and deeply inherited superiority complexes, you hope there's a glimmer of conscience. But not today. Today ends with the child tossing the donkey figure into a jar and yelling, "Victory is mine." Quirky detail. The Tutors library contains scrolls on etiquette, astronomy, and, bizarrely, a guide to royal sneeze interpretation. One scholar insists sneezing on the third lesson of the day is an omen for military disaster. You sneeze during botany. The child gasps. War is coming. You nod solemnly. Only if you fail to learn photosynthesis. Do they know what that is? Absolutely not. Does it matter? Not even a little. Because every lesson is political. Every subject a minefield. Take music. You bring a simple harp, hoping to foster rhythm, discipline, calm. The child smashes it with a scepter. Too whiny, they declare. Bring the war drums. You suggest we build a drum together. Cooperation, teamwork, creation. They assign you as the drum. You make light tapping sounds on your own belly to satisfy them. You are now a human percussion instrument for a 7-year-old monarch in progress. And yet, you still haven't been dismissed, which means you're doing fine, sort of, because every hour you manage to teach them something, even if it's just that Ku the peasant might be sad sometimes, is a minor miracle. And every hour you don't end up accused of undermining divine authority is a small personal victory. Historians still argue whether royal tutors were revered scholars or disposable accessories. You suspect the truth is somewhere between court jester and human stress toy, but you keep teaching. Because even if you can't fix the child, maybe you can sneak one good idea into their head before they grow up and inherit the right to start wars. You wrap up the morning with a compliment so specific and bizarre, it must be safe. Today, your thinking was as clear as a crocodile's third eyelid. The child beams. Success. You should know something before we go further. If you think breakfast with a royal child is a gentle affair of morning dew, soft fruits, and civilized table manners, you have clearly never watched a 6-year-old demigod smear honey across a silk tunic while shouting that the gods invented grapes specifically for him. Breakfast is not a meal, it is a battlefield disguised with figs. You arrive at the eating chamber with your wax tablet tucked under one arm and a slightly trembling servant in tow. The child is already seated, or more accurately, lounging sideways on a cushioned throne designed to make them feel like a miniature sphinx. A silver platter holds cut dates, soft cheese, bread shaped like fish, and a cup of water blessed by no fewer than 3 temple priests. This is where your real lesson begins: bribery, strategy, and light emotional blackmail. You must disguise every lesson in the folds of a croissant. You must weave moral instruction between bites of melon. And above all, you must avoid spilling anything on the royal lap, which is punishable by being reassigned to the stables, under the stables technically. Today, you say cheerfully, we shall learn about the Nile's flooding cycle. The child sticks out their tongue and pokes a grape with a knife. You pivot. Through the story of a river spirit who flooded a kingdom until they learned how to share their figs. Suddenly, you have their attention. This is the game. Everything must be encoded in metaphor and myth, in soft, palatable parables, like smuggling vegetables inside a royal pastry. You begin weaving your tale: a jealous river, a greedy pharaoh, and a mystical flood. And as you speak, you casually slide a geometry lesson into the narrative. You describe how the flood waters recede into perfect triangles of land. You mention ratios, just enough to count as arithmetic. The child doesn't notice. They're too busy feeding cheese to the pet monkey who has just jumped onto the table. You make a mental note. Next lesson: consequences of feeding spoiled dairy to sacred animals. Now the steward arrives, late, nervous. He places a scroll at your elbow, marked with a black ribbon, a discipline memo from the high priest. Apparently, yesterday's lesson about the farmer who defied the palace tax has been interpreted as subversive. You smile, nod, and continue your tale about a squirrel that hoards too many acorns and causes divine chaos. Historians still argue whether tutors were closet revolutionaries or simply very good at pretending not to be eaten alive by protocol. Then comes the trickiest part of breakfast: correcting the child without correcting them. For instance, they point to a fig and declare, "This is what Jupiter looks like up close." You smile gently. Yes, if Jupiter were small, purple, and slightly squishy, that would be a very fine guess. This is not sarcasm. This is palace safe pedagogy. And it requires Olympic level self control. Because here's the thing: no one tells you. Royal children lie, frequently, but not out of malice, out of imagination, out of boredom, out of a desire to see whether you'll call them out and risk being trampled by a tantrum with royal immunity. You once made the mistake of correcting a simple geography error. The child claimed their kingdom bordered the moon. You laughed softly. They cried loudly. 3 astrologers were summoned. A new map was commissioned. It now shows a narrow land bridge between the Nile Delta and the Sea of Lunar Serenity. You learn quickly. Which brings us to the bribe. Because sometimes, despite all your scrolls, songs, and squirrel metaphors, the child just won't focus. That's when you reach for the ultimate tutor's tool: the secret snack. Today, it's a candied lotus seed tucked inside your sleeve. It's contraband, technically. The palace dietitian would weep, but the child sees it, gasps, and demands it immediately. You wag your finger like a wise old magician. Only after you recite the first 5 dynasties. In order. They squint, think, frown. Fine, but I'll skip Dynasty 3. They were boring. You allow it. Historians still debate whether tutors influenced royal memory or if history itself was just curated based on what candy was available. Now comes the final act of breakfast: emotional stabilization. Because mornings are volatile. The sugar rush hits. The grapes run out. The monkey has knocked over the ceremonial pitcher again, and the child's mood swings are faster than the Nile current in flood season. So you tell a story, a calming one, about a boy who tamed a wild horse using only kindness and a well placed apple. The child listens, eyes drooping, not from fatigue, but from just enough emotional regulation to slide them gently into post breakfast compliance mode. You breathe, you made it. Then the child says, I want a wild horse. Get me one by lunch. You smile. Of course, my liege. Perhaps one made of clay to start? They nod, considering. But make it neigh properly, or I'll cry until the statues weep. Deal. And just like that, breakfast is over. One mainstream fact learned, one myth re engineered, one behavioral meltdown successfully averted, and all it cost you was a candied seed and a slight rewriting of planetary geography. You leave the breakfast chamber with jam on your robe, chalk on your hands, and a monkey tail tangled in your scroll case. Just another morning in the forbidden syllabus of royal tutors. There's something about teaching royal children that no one writes in scrolls, but every former tutor carries in their bones. You are always one tantrum away from becoming a cautionary tale. This is why, when you hear the child say, let's go to the garden, your heart flinches, because that sentence has ended empires. The royal garden, in theory, is a place of peace. Birds chirp, papyrus rustles in the breeze, and small fountains gurgle like they've never been peed in by ceremonial cats. But you? You are not here to smell the lilies. You are here to teach botany, without suggesting that anything in nature is more beautiful than the royal child's face. And you must watch out for the curse. Yes, the curse of the tutor. It's not official. It's not written. But historians whisper about it over dusty wine and academic regret. Supposedly, any tutor who accidentally teaches a lesson the royal child doesn't like will mysteriously develop boils, lose hair, or be reassigned to inventory temple compost. You are beginning to believe it's real. The child skips beside you, holding a stalk of sugarcane like a scepter. Tell me, which plant is the most powerful? You consider your options. If you say wheat, you risk offending the barley guild. If you say lotus, you might be accused of pushing spiritual agendas. If you say mint, the palace cook will assume you're starting a rebellion against coriander. You go with papyrus. It records history, you say. Even kings fade, but papyrus remembers. The child stares, then says, so, it's like gossip leaves? You nod solemnly. Yes, the gossipy leaves of time. They like that. Crisis averted. You move into today's lesson, photosynthesis, or rather, how plants eat sun. You use metaphor. Plants drink sunlight like soup. Roots are their spoons. Leaves are their mouths. The child interrupts. So if I stand still and open my mouth to the sun, will I get stronger? You consider. Emotionally, yes. They try it. They stand perfectly still. Eyes closed, mouth wide. You hold your breath. A bird poops on their forehead. Silence. Then laughter. Thank Ra. But your moment of peace is short-lived, because now it's time for the forbidden lesson, not in subject matter, but in consequence. How not to get blamed for something you didn't do. Because a gardener trips, a branch snaps, a bee lands on the child's arm, and suddenly it's your fault. You are the nearest adult. The gardener is already kneeling. The bee has fled. The branch, the branch will probably be turned into a lesson in loyalty. The child pouts. You should have told the bee not to land on me. You reply, I whispered to it, but it misunderstood. It's a new bee. Historians still argue whether tutors were expected to control wildlife or simply act like they could. You change the subject quickly. Would you like to learn about plant healing? The child perks up. Like magical potions? Exactly. You show them aloe for burns, myrrh for cuts, a flower used to treat upset stomachs. The child interrupts again. So if I eat all of them, I become immortal? You panic. Only emotionally. That seems to be working today. You think you're making progress. Until the child asks, where does this flower come from? You answer, the southern province, near the mountains. They pause. We don't like the southern province. Uncle Anctophy came from there. Ah, him again. Well, you say, the flower came first. Maybe Uncle Anctify just borrowed its strength. The child narrows their eyes. I don't like sharing. So much for diplomacy. You offer a compromise. We'll rename the flower. Something heroic. Something that sounds like you. They consider. Name it after my war face. Done. You now have a plant in your lesson plan called Terror Blossom. Another forbidden rule. Invent history when necessary. Because educational flattery is safer than truth, especially when the truth involves geography the child doesn't like. And then comes the worst part of the garden, the statues. You try to pass by quickly, but the child stops at a row of marble ancestors, tall, intimidating. One of them is missing a nose. The child scowls. Who broke him? You say gently, time did. The child nods. I don't like time. We should punish it. You agree. We'll make it run slower during grammar lessons. They smile. You continue on. And now, with morning sun overhead, sweat on your back, and bees still circling, you realize you've fulfilled every part of the unspoken tutor code. One mainstream historical fact: the use of myrrh in ancient medicine. One quirky detail: terror blossom. One scholarly debate: whether the curse of the tutor was literal or metaphorical. The child runs ahead, swinging the sugarcane scepter, laughing like a miniature sun god. You walk behind, composing tomorrow's lesson about river deltas and the diplomacy of ducklings. Because when you're a royal tutor, even the plants are political. You think tutoring royalty might involve chalkboards, scrolls, and maybe an occasional philosophical debate under a fig tree. What you probably didn't expect was the unspoken royal rule number 5. You must always lose at board games. Convincingly. The lesson today? Strategy. Not abstract strategy, mind you. Princely strategy. The kind that involves war, inheritance, honor, and somehow the fate of a clay duck figurine the child has named General Quack. You sit cross-legged on the tiled floor of the study chamber, which smells faintly of melted beeswax, crushed petals, and something that might be burnt sandalwood, or your dignity. Before you, an elaborately carved game board lies flat on the floor. Squares of ivory and obsidian form a snaking path. The ancient Egyptian game of senet, a favorite of queens, pharaohs, and now, unfortunately, your 7-year-old boss. You've played this game 100 times. You've won exactly 0 of them. Because winning is not an option. Losing, also not an option. You must almost win, and then crumble like a sympathetic statue. It's a delicate art. You move your piece. A quiet, calculated play. The child narrows their eyes. Are you trying to win? No, you say, merely surviving. Good, they say, because if you beat me, I'll throw General Quack into the fire. You look at the duck. The duck stares back. Poor fellow has seen things. You let the child win this round, just barely, but you make it look like a valiant effort. You gasp. You groan. You clutch your chest in performative agony. The child cheers. Victory is mine. Again, this is technically your lesson on probability and risk. You casually reference the odds of dice throws, sneak in terms like strategy and positioning, and even get away with the phrase long-term consequence. But the real subject is ego management. Historians still argue whether board games were meant to teach discipline or simply offer a socially acceptable outlet for early stage megalomania. In the case of your student, it's definitely the latter. The child wipes imaginary sweat from their brow. That was hard. I almost respected you. Progress. You suggest another game, maybe chess, a little more intellectual, a little less duck focused. The child agrees on one condition. We use royal pieces. You nod. Naturally. Except royal pieces now means pawns, peasants with silly hats, rooks, temples made of bread, knights, literal goat figurines, the queen, their favorite doll, the king, a beetle encased in amber, which must never be touched. You adapt. You describe the movements, the tactics, the art of protection and sacrifice. The child leans forward. So, the queen is the strongest? You hesitate. Technically, yes. They raise an eyebrow. Then why is the king more important? You stare into space. Because the king is the goal, but the queen is the game. The child claps. That's dramatic. I like it. You've stumbled into philosophy. And just like that, your lesson drifts into metaphor. You speak of alliances, of unseen consequences, of how rushing to win can leave the board exposed. The child nods, then throws the goat figurine across the room and says, I'm bored. Back to Senate. You prepare yourself for another tactical defeat when suddenly you win, accidentally. Your last piece slides into the sacred square. The room goes silent. You freeze. The child looks at you like you've just eaten the sun. You won? I did, you whisper, but only to teach you how it feels to lose with dignity. They frown, then grin. Then throw General Quack at your head. You duck. Quack hits a vase. The vase topples, shatters. A servant gasps from the hallway. You and the child stare at each other, wide-eyed. Then the child says, that never happened. Agreed, you reply. Quirky tutor, rule Nier 43. All broken objects are lessons in impermanence. Mainstream historical fact. Senet was often placed in tombs to guide souls through the afterlife. You wonder whether this game is guiding your soul through repeated character assassination. Still, you're learning. Every fake loss, every dramatic collapse, every intentionally dumb move is a lesson in keeping power at arm's length. Because when the child becomes ruler, they will expect to win every real battle, every war, every diplomatic exchange. You just hope they remember how gracefully you lost, even if it meant sacrificing your dignity. And General Quack, you help the child clean up the board. They yawn, satisfied. I'm getting better, they say. You nod. And so am I. Which is technically true. You're getting better at survival. If you ever find yourself standing in a perfumed hallway, holding a jar of ink and a stack of morality tales, and you hear a loud sound resembling someone stepping on a goose, don't panic. That's not a goose. That's the royal child laughing at their own flatulence. You're about to teach a lesson, and your classroom just turned into a wind tunnel of giggles and divine digestive authority. Because here's the thing no one warns you about when tutoring the chosen heir of a powerful dynasty. Royal bodily functions are sacred, hilarious, and somehow educational. Today's lesson was supposed to be ethics, maybe a little philosophy, something tidy, maybe even a fable about fairness involving a fox and an overly ambitious crocodile. Instead, your class begins with a 10-minute ode to the royal trumpet, as the child has named their morning burst of gastrointestinal thunder. They look at you, eyes sparkling. What does it mean when my insides roar? You consider saying a curse, but settle on it means you have a powerful constitution. They nod. It must be because I'm descended from gods. Absolutely. So, you pivot. You must pivot. You take this moment, this absurd, fragrant moment, and attempt to make it instructive. You say, in some ancient traditions, flatulence was believed to release inner demons. The child gasps, so I'm exorcising evil? Yes, you whisper, with passion. This is not in any scroll, but it's now gospel to your young ruler. And because you're now spiraling through forbidden rule number 6, all things can be a lesson, you begin weaving this into your moral curriculum. Even the humblest sound can have meaning. You begin, gently steering the child's thoughts away from audible eruptions and toward the topic of unseen consequences, a concept most royalty never fully grasp. You explain how a decision, like a whisper, or yes, even a gust, can ripple through a court, affecting everything. Power, after all, is not about volume, it's about timing. The child frowns. So I'm like a thunderstorm? Exactly. Loud, unexpected, but sometimes needed. This delights them. You've now created a metaphor that you will never escape. For the next month, every major command the child gives will be followed by the phrase, let the winds of justice blow. Historians still argue whether royal tutors were wise philosophers or just desperate improvisers trying to turn farts into political theory. You suspect it's both. And then, as if the gods want to test your composure, a scribe arrives to deliver your weekly performance assessment. Yes, you are evaluated, not on your lessons, but on your influence. This week's report includes the child quoted Aristotle, but added, and that's why gas is wisdom. The heir demanded a statue of himself, mid battle, mid toot. Royal dog now trained to bark every time the child releases insight. You nod, sign the scroll, and return to your post. The next portion of the lesson involves a scroll titled The Parable of the Just Pharaoh, which tells the story of a wise ruler who never raised his voice or his taxes. You barely begin before the child interrupts. Did he fart though? You pause. Not in the story. The child wrinkles their nose. That's unrealistic. You sigh. Perhaps he did, quietly, modestly, as a sign of grace. They beam. He was noble. You nod. He was also lactose intolerant. Ancient papyri rarely mention dairy accidents. And just like that, you've reframed the parable. You slide in words like modesty, temperance, graceful restraint. The child listens, occasionally fidgeting, occasionally letting one slip and giggling like a divinely empowered whoopee cushion. You manage to extract a moment of focus. You ask, what do you think made the just Pharaoh beloved? The child replies, he didn't tax the flatulence. Close enough. You decide to end the lesson with a drawing exercise. Show me the just Pharaoh, you say. They draw a stick figure on a throne, surrounded by clouds and smiling citizens. You dare not comment on the symbolism, but you file it away, along with other strange, precious insights, because beneath all the noise, something real is forming. Maybe not empathy, maybe not humility, but the child is beginning to associate leadership with laughter. And that, in your line of work, counts as progress. Your only concern? The palace artists have been summoned. The child wants a tapestry. Title? The Benevolent Breeze. It will hang in the Hall of Heroes, next to one of Uncle Anktifi. Of course, mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptians used flatulence in humor and medicine. Quirky tidbit. One pharaoh allegedly blamed military defeat on bad air. Open debate. Historians still argue whether bodily functions were symbolic or just funny. You collect the drawings. You adjust your robe. You bow. not to the child, but to the sheer ridiculous power of metaphor, because you are a royal tutor. And sometimes education begins with a fart. There's a special kind of dread that coils in your gut when the child looks up from their papyrus, narrows their eyes, and says, "Let's talk about death." You were hoping for a light day, maybe some poetry, perhaps a gentle discussion about irrigation systems. But no, today you are diving headfirst into existential dread, ancient edition. The child kicks their sandals off. Why do people stop moving? You pause, carefully. Well, death is when the body rests and the soul journeys on. Where? Some say the field of reeds, you reply, drawing on the official state doctrine. A paradise of peace and plenty. The child tilts their head, but only some say, "Uh-oh, you've just opened the door to an epistemological crisis." You try to reframe. Different people believe different things, but what matters is how we live. They frown. So if I eat all my grapes and be kind to peasants, I get eternal grapes? Metaphorically, this doesn't satisfy them. What if I'm mean to peasants? You hesitate. Then your afterlife might be less comfortable. They blink. Define less comfortable. You consider describing the devourer of the dead, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, but decide you like your current employment status. So you go with a bit drafty, fewer cushions. This seems acceptable. You pivot quickly, pulling out a lesson scroll on Ma'at, the goddess of balance, truth, and order. You explain the heart weighing ceremony. When a person dies, their heart is weighed against a feather, too heavy with sin, and it's gobbled up by a monster. The child gasps. A monster like Aunt Teppy? I wouldn't say that. I would. You move on. Living well means being just, you say. It means understanding others, practicing fairness. The child ponders this, then asks, "Did Uncle Onctife's heart get eaten?" You suppress a groan. Historians are divided. Quirky tidbit. One pharaoh was buried with a fake heart, allegedly to trick the gods into overlooking his rather extensive list of enemies. You consider suggesting this to the child as a what not to do. Instead, you steer the discussion toward legacy. You ask, "What do you want people to say about you in the future?" They think, seriously, for once, that I was brave and smart and had the cleanest toenails. You nod. That's a strong start. You try to introduce a writing exercise. Draft your own tomb inscription. The child grabs a stylus, scrawls, "Here lies the best ever. Worship me. Also, I farted." You blink. That's memorable. They giggle. Good. I want people to remember me. You gently encourage them to add some virtues. Kindness, wisdom, leadership. They add. Unparalleled snack distribution. Close enough. Then comes the hardest question. "Will you die?" the child asks, looking straight at you. And suddenly, you are no longer a tutor. You are immortal. You swallow. Yes, someday. But hopefully not before lunch. They frown. You're not allowed. I haven't finished learning yet. You smile. Then I'll keep teaching. That way, part of me stays with you. They nod, like a ghost tutor. Exactly. A mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptians believed names had power. Speak a name after death, and you keep a person alive. You mention this. The child decides your name will be carved under the statue of General Quack, just in case. You are honored. Sort of. You end the lesson with a quiet moment. You draw a feather. You talk about balance, not just in death, but in life. How a just ruler listens more than they speak. how power is heaviest when wielded without care. They listen. They're still. It's rare. Then they whisper, "What happens if your heart is too light?" You pause. Then you've given so much of it away that you float. They consider. I like floating. And in that moment, beneath the weight of dynasties and dusty scrolls, you believe, just briefly, that maybe this little storm of chaos and crumbs might one day rule with grace. But only if you survive snack time. You are summoned again to the hall of instruction. But today, your lesson isn't arithmetic or ethics or even divine flatulence. Today's lesson is facial neutrality. Because in the palace, even your eyebrows are political. You enter the chamber with your standard tools: scroll, ink, emergency raisins, and a face so blank it could pass for a clay tablet. This is your armor, because any emotion is a liability. Raise your brow at the wrong moment, and you're accused of sarcasm. Flinch during a lecture on why I should be Pharaoh now, actually, and you're marked as a traitor. Smile too widely at a joke about Aunt Teppy falling down the stairs, and suddenly you're laughing at misfortune, which may or may not be punishable by reassignment to the Crocodile Pond filtration staff. So today, your real subject isn't language or science, it's survival. The child bounds into the room, glittering in gold-threaded loungewear, dragging a new pet, something between a mongoose and a wig. This is Chancellor Fluffy, they announce. He has opinions. You nod. You do not laugh. You do not blink. You let your face remain a calm, mysterious canvas of deep intellectual presence and absolutely zero judgment. The child tosses Fluffy onto the table and declares, "Today he teaches the class." You nod again. "Excellent. Let's learn what Chancellor Fluffy has to say about geometry." They grin. "He says triangles are lies." You turn to the scroll and pretend to record that. "Noted. We'll revise the syllabus." This is not a joke. This is tutor theater, and your expression must remain softer than a sunrise over the Nile, because you've learned, often the hard way, that palace life is one long game of nonverbal poker. You are always being watched by stewards, by guards, by rival tutors who would happily report your face for crimes of unenthusiastic nodding. Historians still argue whether royal tutors were naturally stoic or just professionally terrified. You suspect both. Midway through the lesson, the child asks, "Do you think I'm annoying?" A test. You breathe in, tilt your head slightly. "I think you're a storm, loud, brilliant, and never boring." They consider. Storms are cool. You pass. Then they change gears. "Why do grown-ups always frown when I enter?" Another trap. "They're dazzled by your presence," you say. "Some people just dazzle through frowning." The child shrugs. "I think they're scared." You almost blink, but you catch yourself. "Perhaps," you say, "because they know storms can build or destroy." The child stares at you, then launches into a story about how they'll one day outlaw frowning and replace it with mandatory eyebrow dancing. You smile inwardly, not outwardly, because another forbidden rule: never let your face betray your thoughts. You once raised a single very small eyebrow at the child's plan to turn the treasury into a water park. Within an hour, a meeting of the royal architects had been scheduled. They still expect slides, so you practice stillness, perfect it. Even when the child fakes a fall, stares at you from the floor, and shouts, "Did you smirk?" "No," you say calmly. "I was communing with Ra." A mainstream fact. Egyptian scribes and priests trained for years in the art of face control when delivering messages to royalty. They believed facial discipline reflected inner balance. Quirky tidbit. One ancient court scroll outlines expressions to avoid, including the smirk of heresy and the pout of poor prophecy. You practice both daily, in private, with a pillow. Back in the lesson, the child draws a picture of you. It has a perfectly blank face, eyes wide and unblinking. This is you, they say proudly. You nod. I like it, they add. You're hard to read, like a riddle. You take that as the highest compliment. You spend the last minutes of class teaching subtlety, how leaders speak through presence, how stillness can command a room more than shouting. You draw comparisons between ancient generals and statues, both solid, both watching, both calculating. The child fidgets. Do I have to be still too? Sometimes, you say, stillness lets others think you're wise, even when you're just digesting figs. They nod solemnly, then burp loudly. You show no reaction. That too is the lesson. Because in the court of power, every twitch is testimony, and your best defense is a poker face carved by time, patience, and sheer survival instinct. There comes a time in every royal tutor's week, usually around midday, when the heat curls the edges of your scrolls and the palace smells vaguely of boiled sandalwood and disappointment, when you are asked to teach the history of the world, all of it, in one afternoon, by someone who thinks history started the day they were born. The child sits, legs draped over the side of the gilded learning couch, munching on honeyed nuts like a bored demigod at a Netflix binge. Start with the beginning, they say, waving one hand. But make it fun and about me. You sigh internally and begin the sacred act of making history child-centric. Well, you say, in the beginning, there was chaos, and from chaos emerged the first gods, the first stories, and the first people. Were they pretty? Probably, you reply, but not as symmetrical as you. This, of course, is your in. History in the palace is not about accuracy. It's about relevance. So you continue. And then, brave rulers began building civilizations, not for themselves, but so that one day you could inherit their greatness. They nod, pleased. Good. That's how it should be. You press on through Sumer, Babylon, and early Egypt, highlighting each time some grain-based innovation occurred. The child likes grain. Grain is secure. Grain is sovereign. When you reach the Hittites, they interrupt. Are they still around? You hesitate, in spirit. Can I invade them? No, but I have a stick with jewels on it. You gently explain that the stick is ceremonial, not a license to conduct international diplomacy. They scowl. I'll declare war anyway. A pretend one. You nod. Excellent idea. Pretend wars are much more fun and reversible. Quirky tidbit. At least one boy pharaoh once declared war on a neighboring kingdom because they gifted him a slightly wilted bouquet. He later revoked it when presented with a puppy. You bring this up. See? The child exclaims. Puppies are diplomatic. You agree. Next, you roll out the map scroll. It's larger than the table, barely fits the room, and includes places that may or may not exist. Show me where the battle of me versus everyone took place. You point to the middle. Always the middle. The center of the world. The seat of power. They grin. I won, right? Undoubtedly. You sneak in a few historical facts. Nile irrigation, early medicine, tax systems. The child seems mildly interested until you say the word taxes. What are those again? You say, they're gratitude payments. For what? For having roads and temples and 12 personal food tasters. They ponder this. I prefer the term thank you coins. Approved, you say. Historians still argue whether royal tutors were responsible for shaping a child's political vocabulary. given your current student has renamed a levy the Great Appreciation Festival, you lean toward yes. Now comes the inevitable comparison game. Who was the greatest ruler ever? You know this answer is a trap. You consider names, Hatshepsut, too complicated. Ramses, too obvious. Antifi? Yes, absolutely not. So you say, the greatest ruler is the one who learns from all of them. Boring, the child groans. You lean in. But very difficult, which makes it rare, which makes it powerful. They perk up, then pause. Did Cleopatra invent eyeliner? You say, she popularized it, but it already existed. They nod, brushing imaginary liner across their cheeks. Smart and fashionable. I like her. You slide into discussions of legacy, monuments, and memory. You talk about how rulers are remembered not for their noise, but for their impact. The child squints. So, if I scream, I'm amazing, every day, that's not legacy? You hesitate. It's a start. They try it anyway. I'm amazing, they shout. Their voice echoes through the chamber, probably down into the kitchens. You don't flinch. That's the rule. And somewhere in there, buried between ego and honeyed snacks, a flicker of actual interest appears. The child asks, what do historians do? You reply, they remember, and they ask why. Do they ever get punished for it? You smile. Only when they ask the wrong people. They laugh. Good thing I'm the right person. You nod. The exact right person. Then they ask, what do you want to be remembered for? You freeze. No one's asked you that before. You look at your scrolls, your ink-stained fingers, the crumbs on your lap, the shadow of Chancellor Fluffy chewing on a map in the corner. You say, for being the tutor who made the boring parts slightly less boring. They grin. And for not crying when I threw figs at you, you both laugh. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient tutors were sometimes buried near the children they taught, considered vital companions for the afterlife. You don't know if that's comforting or alarming, but you do know that in a palace full of power, memory, and performance, today you taught real history. Even if it was dressed in eyeliner and filtered through figs, there are many things you signed up for as a royal tutor. Teaching literacy, shaping moral character, explaining the subtleties of agricultural taxation with puppets. What you didn't expect was this. Posture class. Yes, posture. Specifically correcting the royal flat feet of a child destined to be both ruler and somehow ballerina of state processions. It begins with a seemingly innocent request. The child slumps into the study chamber, sandals askew, dragging one foot like a wounded heron. I don't feel like walking today, they say. You glance at the schedule. Today was supposed to be debate training, Socratic method. You were going to use pretend court cases involving imaginary goats. But no, the prince has declared it a no standing day. Did your feet hurt? You ask carefully. They're tired of being feet, the child moans. You pause. Would they like to be something else? Yes, I want them to be clouds. So now you're a cloud walking coach. This, of course, is your cue to introduce a new lesson. One cloaked in the gentle whisper of health and dignity, the art of carriage. And kings do not stomp, you say, rising slowly. They glide, they float. Like clouds? Exactly. You demonstrate. A slow, deliberate walk. Spine long, shoulders soft, chin gently lifted, not unlike someone balancing an overripe pomegranate on their head and pretending it's a crown. The child snorts. You look like a walking soup ladle. You bow. A dignified ladle. They stand wobbly. You adjust their shoulders. Feel the line between sky and earth. That's where you walk. They raise an eyebrow. You mean on the ground? Metaphorically. They try it. Step, wobble, flop. They fall dramatically onto a pillow pile and declare, "My arches are cursed." You suppress a smile. Forbidden rule the Ranger 10: never insult a royal foot, no matter how pancake like it appears. Mainstream historical fact: Egyptian royals were known to undergo posture training, often overseen by physicians, dancers, or unfortunate tutors like yourself. Quirky tidbit: one pharaoh allegedly had sandals made of palm bark, designed to remind him of pain when his posture slouched. A wearable guilt trip. You consider suggesting this, then immediately unconsider it. Instead, you reach for a scroll you never thought you'd use: basic anatomical alignment, a poetic approach. You read aloud: "The spine, like a reed, must not bend to every breeze. The feet, like temple columns, hold sacred weight, and the head, O noble lantern, must shine forward, not down." The child claps slowly. "That was weirdly beautiful." You nod. All great truths sound a little weird. They try again, this time with a little more control. They don't fall. You silently cheer. Then they ask, "Why does posture even matter?" And you, God's help you, launch into a quiet, dreamy monologue about how people carry themselves when no one is looking. Posture, you say, isn't just for court. It's how you walk into a room and make people feel safe. It's how you stand when someone's crying or when you need to tell them the truth. The child is unusually still. "Does that mean I have to always look perfect?" they ask. "No," you say gently, "just honest and steady." They nod. "So, strong, but not stompy." "Precisely." You walk the room together practicing. You introduce obstacles: scrolls, ceremonial dogs, a sleeping steward. The child navigates each with surprising grace, until they trip, again, this time on their own tunic. They tumble forward, crash into your legs, and bring both of you down in a tangle of limbs, ink pots, and educational dignity. You lie on the floor, staring at the ceiling. They giggle. "That was definitely not gliding." You sigh. "That was a royal tumble." They sit up. "So, posture is hard." You nod. "All the important things are." Historians still argue whether tutors were responsible for royal physical development or just morally obligated to prevent their students from walking like disgruntled donkeys. You feel strongly that it's both. The lesson ends with an impromptu race across the marble tiles, gliding style only. You declare that the winner gets to rename the position of Supreme Posture Commander. They win, naturally. Their chosen title? Cloud General of the Golden Toes. You write it down, because of course you do. And as you help them remove their ceremonial sandals, which, by the way, are made of imported gazelle leather and definitely not suited for arch support, you whisper, "Your feet may be flat, but your soul walks tall." They grin. "That's going on my tomb." Of course it is. By now, you've taught the child to walk like a cloud, lose like a king, and philosophize about flatulence. You've evaded political landmines, soothed meltdowns with metaphors, and even rebranded taxes as thank you coins. But nothing compares to royal mealtime etiquette, because lunch in the palace is not a meal, it's a performance. The child enters the dining hall like a general surveying a battlefield, robes flowing, hair still slightly damp from a grape juice incident. They plop into a carved cedar chair and bark, "Bring forth the duck." You do not blink, you do not smile, you do not remind them that today's duck is, in fact, a lentil stew. Because forbidden rule number 11: never contradict a royal craving with reality. Simply rename the food. "This is cloud duck stew," you say, "the finest duck impersonator in the land." They lean forward, sniff, stir. "It looks like mud." You nod solemnly. Delicious seasoned mud. They grin. Okay, but the spoons are too spoony. You retrieve the ceremonial eating dagger, a small curved utensil used mainly for posing in paintings, and hand it over like you're bestowing a divine relic. Much better, they say, stabbing a chickpea like it insulted their lineage. Your lesson today is table manners, a deceptively simple goal. You must teach a child who believes elbows are weapons and napkins are decorative scarves how to dine like someone who might one day negotiate a treaty over olives. So you begin subtly. You demonstrate napkin in lap, upright posture, slow, deliberate chewing. They watch you with the suspicious glare of someone trying to figure out whether you're performing a spell or having a stroke. You look like a sad heron, they announce. Thank you, you reply. The heron is sacred. They try mimicking your form, sort of. They hold the spoon delicately, raise it to their lips, and blow on it so hard the lentils launch into orbit. One hits a passing servant. The child cackles. That's diplomacy. You shake your head. That's artillery. Mainstream fact. Ancient banquets were structured affairs. High ranking officials were judged by how they held their cup. Slurp wrong, and you were politically suspect. Quirky tidbit: one pharaoh reportedly had a chewing scribe whose sole job was to chew test bites to demonstrate technique. You are now considering applying for that position, as it likely involves fewer lentils in the eye. The child swings their legs and says, "Tell me what every food says about me." You pause, then begin, because now you're not just a tutor, you're a culinary astrologer. Grapes say you're indulgent, but poetic. Figs say you're earthy, mysterious. Goat cheese says you enjoy chaos. What about onions? Brave, bold, occasionally weepy. They beam. Perfect. Midway through the meal, they test your limits. They pick up a grape, hold it high, and shout, "Do I eat this like a peasant or a god?" You choose your words carefully. A peasant savors, a god devours, a ruler selects. They nod solemnly, then I shall selectively devour. They shove 6 grapes into their mouth. Progress. Historians still argue whether royal tutors should have corrected such behavior or quietly recorded it for future biographers. You choose both. You have a private scroll titled Adventures in Grape Aggression. You attempt to refocus. A proper ruler shares. Generosity builds loyalty. They eye you. Fine. You may have this. They pass you a single lentil. You bow. I am honored. They whisper, "It's the spicy one." You eat it anyway. Your tongue regrets everything. As the meal winds down, you teach the final, sacred tenet of dining with dignity, the graceful decline of excess. You say, "A wise ruler knows when to stop." They look at the plate, then you. "But there's one fig left." Exactly. They narrow their eyes. "Is this a metaphor?" "Yes," you say, "about restraint, about discipline." They take the fig, lick it, and place it back. Now no one wants it. That's diplomacy too. You inhale sharply. That's advanced. They beam, and then, like clockwork, they leap from their chair and run across the hall, yelling, "Cloud duck forever," their mouths still half full of chickpeas and newfound self-esteem. You lean back. You've survived the storm. Mainstream fact delivered. Quirky tidbit explored. Scholarly debate alluded to, because historians still can't decide whether royal mealtime rituals were for nourishment or simply a chaotic social test. You take one last sip of cooled mint tea and whisper to yourself, "Only 9 more sections to go." There's a specific kind of silence in the Royal Library that feels suspicious. Not peaceful, not studious, just suspicious. That's the silence you walk into today. You find the child tucked behind a mountain of scrolls, holding a pigeon, a live one, wearing a tiny hat. His name, the child whispers, is Minister Feathers. Of course it is. You glance at the bird, then at the growing stack of diplomatic letters it's been sitting on. The child beams. We're sending messages. Important ones. You step closer. May I ask to whom? Everyone, they reply. The Queen of Cats, the Duke of Moonlight, and the neighbor who steals our incense. You nod as if this makes absolute sense, because forbidden rule number 12: never discourage royal letter writing, even if the letters are addressed to mythical figures or unusually passive aggressive neighbors. Instead, you pivot. Then today, you say, we study rhetoric. They perk up. Is that a type of bird? Not exactly, but it is how we make our words fly. The child squeals. Like Minister Feathers. Exactly like that. So you unroll a scroll and begin a lesson on persuasive writing, crafted entirely around imaginary pigeon-based diplomacy. You start simple. Tone, salutation, signature flourishes. Most honorable feline empress, we extend our paw of peace. To the esteemed Duke of Moonlight, your nightly glow is acceptable. Or to the guy stealing incense, kindly stop before we unleash royal bees. The child writes furiously, tongue poking from the side of their mouth. They turn to you. What's the word for making things sound fancier than they are? Eloquence, you say. They nod. I have it. They do not, but that's not the point. Today, you're planting seeds. Word seeds. In a child who, until last week, thought subtlety was a type of dessert. Mainstream historical fact. Royal education in ancient courts often emphasized rhetoric as a tool of governance. A well-phrased threat could do more than 1,000 soldiers. Quirky tidbit. One young ruler reportedly wrote love poems to his own reflection and mailed them anonymously. He suspected everyone was in love with him, including himself. You tell this story. The child claps. Finally, someone who gets it. They draft a poem to their future self. Dear me, you are glorious. Never stop. Also, remember to outlaw itchy tunics. You suggest adding a metaphor, maybe about leadership being like a lantern in the dark. They frown. That's nice. But I think I'll go with leadership is like riding a lion made of lava. You sigh. Also valid. You demonstrate how structure works. Thesis, support, conclusion. You build a sample letter to a foreign leader about grain trade. The child rewrites it into a request for diplomatic mangoes. Progress. Then they ask, can I insult someone in a way that sounds nice? And now you introduce the ancient art of polite menace. Examples. We hope your crops thrive, far away from ours. Your generosity is only matched by your confusion. May your armies grow strong enough to stay put. They are delighted. They scribble one to Uncle Anctophy. Dearest uncle, your presence is unforgettable. We've tried. Sincerely, the child of the sun. You suggest they maybe not send that one. They pretend not to hear. Historians still argue whether young royals developed empathy through writing or just became better at weaponizing language with flair. You lean toward the latter. By late afternoon, Minister Feathers has delivered exactly 0 letters, having pecked the inkpot and declared a personal strike. The child replaces him with a messenger, tortoise named Speedy Negotiator. You don't correct the name. Instead, you sit beside the child, showing how the right word can soothe, inspire, warn, or delight. You read aloud from classic odes, one about justice, another about humility, another about the calming power of mint tea. The child listens, then says, I want people to remember my words. They will, you say, if your words are worth carrying. They nod slowly. Then I guess I'll need better pigeons. You chuckle. And better paper. The lesson ends not with a test, but with a promise. To craft a royal decree tomorrow, you suggest sleeping on it. They yawn. Words are powerful, but naps are stronger. You agree. For once you are completely aligned, it begins with a robe. Not just any robe, the robe. The ceremonial one, usually reserved for coronations, solar eclipses, and that one time the royal cat turned 17. Today, the child insists on wearing it for your lesson on what leaders do. They appear dramatically draped in golden linen, trailing a train so long it has its own weather. I am now supreme everything, they declare, and I'm ready to do what rulers do. You brace yourself. So, they ask, arms crossed, what do I actually do? You smile gently. That's the question, isn't it? Because forbidden rule number 13, teaching power to someone who already has it, is like trying to explain rain to the ocean. You begin by laying out your scrolls, tiny stories of kings and queens, good ones, terrible ones, and those who simply wandered off one day and became poets. You don't name names, but yes, one of them was probably Uncle Anktifi. You ask, what do you think a ruler's job is? Easy, they say, bossing people, wearing jewelry, deciding when things explode. You take a slow breath. That's one interpretation. So you counter. You introduce the concept of service, of caretaking. You say, the ruler is the gardener of the kingdom. You don't just sit on the throne. You water things, you prune them, you plant what's needed. They blink. Do I have to actually garden? No, you say. It's a metaphor. They sigh with relief. Good. Dirt is not royal. You try another approach. You sketch a pyramid, not of stones, but of people. The scribes, the builders, the cooks, the guards, the scribes again, because honestly, they're everywhere. Then, at the very tip, you place a tiny figure wearing a very dramatic robe. This, you say, is you, the top. But that means you carry everyone below. They stare. That sounds heavy. It is. They stare harder. Can't I just hire someone to carry me? Many try, you say, but history forgets them. Mainstream fact. Pharaohs were called shepherds of the people, not masters. Their role, theoretically, was to guide, not dictate. Quirky tidbit. One young Egyptian ruler held court while hiding under a table for a week, declaring it an observational phase. The kingdom did not collapse, but the vizier developed a twitch. You share this. The child cackles. So even rulers hide? Sometimes, you say, but the best ones come out. You ask, what would you do if there were a drought? Make it illegal, they say. You raise an eyebrow. Okay. I'd summon my advisors, make a big speech, offer extra water, build a well, make everyone feel like I saw them. You pause. That is excellent. They beam. I'm basically doing it already. You smile. Leadership isn't just action, it's awareness. When you notice what others miss, that's power. They scribble it down. I'll put that on the palace wall, next to the mural of me on a dolphin, naturally. Then you pivot again. What do you do when people disagree with you? The child's face hardens. Throw figs. Alternative. They think. Listen, you nod. Even when it's hard, they frown. Maybe just listen a little. You let that stand, for now. Historians still argue whether royal tutors were successful in instilling humility, or simply wore it themselves until it rubbed off by osmosis. You bring out a scroll of ancient oaths, Lines spoken by new rulers for millennia. I shall hold the weight of many. I shall speak with more than my voice. I shall rule not by fear, but by steadiness. The child reads it aloud, voice quieter than usual, then says, I like that, but I'm adding, and I shall wear excellent robes. Fair. The lesson ends with a game. You pretend to be a worried citizen. The child has to respond. You. My roof leaks. Child. I send roofers and a new cat. You. My cow is sad. Child. We all know cows have deep inner lives. You. I'm hungry. Child. There shall be a feast. They're learning. Slowly. With flair. You conclude by asking, what kind of ruler do you want to be? They pause. Then say, one who listens, one who sparkles, and one who doesn't make people afraid to talk. You nod. That's a win. As they leave the room, robe trailing behind, they whisper to the air, I shall water the kingdom, then trip over a cat and declare war on all tables. Still, progress. You're awakened at dawn, not by a trumpet or a bell or even a particularly rude rooster, but by the urgent arrival of a scroll launched at your face. On it, a single sentence, written in very large, very aggressive hieroglyphs. Today I am a god. You blink, roll over, debate hiding under your blanket. But no, you are a tutor. You have responsibilities. And unfortunately, those responsibilities now include managing divine delusions. You arrive in the lesson chamber to find the child standing atop a plinth made of stacked cushions, arms outstretched, like a victorious flamingo. I am Ra, they announce, or maybe Horus. Haven't decided yet, but I do want offerings. You suppress a groan, because today, my friend, is not just make believe. Today is divine role play day. Forbidden rule with 14. Never argue theological hierarchy with an 8-year-old wearing eyeliner and declaring themselves sunborn. You bow slightly. Oh, great one. How shall I serve? They pause. Begin with snacks. You offer pomegranate seeds on a bronze tray, resisting the urge to label them humility in edible form. Next, you say, since you are a god, would you care to learn how your worshippers honor you? They nod, swirling a goblet of spiced water with such drama, it creates its own climate system. So you begin a lesson on cultic ritual. Mainstream fact. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was believed to be a living god, often associated with Horus in life and Osiris in death. Entire temples revolved around this idea. Quirky tidbit. One teenage pharaoh demanded his priests clap after every sentence he spoke. The clapping scroll survives. It's 22 feet long. You teach the child how rituals were structured: purification, incense, chanting, offerings. They reinterpret it as bath time with rose petals, chanting, I'm amazing, to the beat of a tambourine, offering themselves a cupcake. Close enough. You pivot toward governance. As a god, you are also a judge. People come to you for justice. The child gasps, bring me a goat and a gavel. You offer a chalk drawing of both, then present two fictional cases. Case 1. A farmer accuses his neighbor of stealing a turnip. Case 2. A merchant claims his donkey sings at night and disrupts business. The child ponders both, chin in hand, radiating divinity. Judgments. The thief must return the turnip plus one extra turnip for emotional damage. The donkey is appointed royal night bard and gets a hat. You nod solemnly, just and wise. They grin. Being a god is easy. You lean forward. Then let's try something harder. You present a crisis. Famine in the outer provinces. Water running low. People scared. What does a god do now? The child hesitates. Tell them not to panic. Will that feed them? No, maybe send help. From where? They frown. Can I make it rain? You smile. Not literally, but you can move rain through trade, through planning, through promises. They sit down, robe crumpling. The game is wearing off. Now, they're just a child again, a thoughtful one. They whisper, "That sounds hard." You nod. Gods don't get lunch breaks. They sigh. Being a god isn't fun anymore. You offer a fig. Then maybe you don't need to be a god. Just someone who cares. They munch silently. Historians still argue whether encouraging young royals to embody divinity helped or hindered their development. You suspect it mostly depended on the snacks. Later, you take a walk together in the garden. The child points at ants. Do they think I'm a god? You say, maybe. You are very large and unpredictable. They laugh. Then crouch down, place a leaf gently near the ants, and say, there, a gift. You watch in silence. Maybe the lesson sank in. At dinner, the child orders everyone to call them by their full divine title, the radiant glow of glorious majesty, who sometimes trips but is still powerful. You dutifully comply. But they don't ask for worship this time, just a story. So you tell one about a ruler who was powerful because they were kind, who built no monuments, but left behind gardens, bread, and quiet. The child listens, then says softly, I want that kind of power. And you think, maybe today was holy after all. You arrive at the lesson chamber and stop cold because the child is already there, sitting cross-legged, quiet, focused, building something. It's a legal system made out of sticks, pebbles, and stolen game pieces. You don't say anything. You just ease into your cushion like a suspicious cat. Because forbidden rule number 15. When a royal child shows interest in law, let them cook. They glance up. Today I am the high arbiter of everything. And this, they gesture dramatically, is my court of pebbles. You bow. I await your wise judgments, O gravel chancellor. They point to the pile of pieces. These are citizens. This one, they lift a grain of rice, stole honey. This one, a pebble, says they didn't. You sit up straighter. Very serious. They nod. I have made laws. Want to hear them? You don't just want to. You fear not hearing them might lead to exile. Law number 1. Everyone gets cake on Wednesdays. Law number 2. Screaming is allowed, but only in rhyme. Law number 3. No one may look sad without my permission. You suggest adding a preamble. They frown. What's that? A big fancy paragraph at the top that makes everything sound more official. They craft one on the spot. In the name of me and my very good brain, I declare this kingdom mostly fun and slightly organized. You're impressed. You pull out a scroll and begin today's lesson. The origins of law. Hammurabi. The 12 tables. Pharaonic decrees etched into limestone. The idea that order is a promise. That laws are not just rules, but reflections of what a people value. Mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian law was famously case-based and focused on balance. Mahat. The principle of truth, order, and harmony. Quirky tidbit. One known court ruling involved a man who stole a goose and then tried to blame it on a talking statue. The court ruled the man guilty, and the statue was reassigned to a less talkative temple. You present this case? The child is thrilled. I'd pardon the statue, promote it, naturally. Then you go deeper. What happens, you ask, when a law is unfair? They pause. Unfair to me or to everyone? Both. They cross their arms. Well, if it's unfair to me, I throw it in the river. And if it's unfair to others? They hesitate longer, then whisper, I fix it, quietly. So no one knows it was wrong. You smile. Even gods can revise. They look relieved. Good, because Law No. 7 needs work. Right now, it bans sandals. That's not popular. You nod. Progress. You role play a courtroom. You're the defense. They're the judge. The crime? A baker shorted a customer one bun. The child bangs a ladle. That's theft. You counter. What if the baker's child is sick and he's distracted? They frown. So, maybe he gets a warning? And a hug, you add. The child scribbles something on a papyrus scrap. Law 10. Mercy exists. They hold it up. This one's important. You nod. That might be the realest law. They get quiet. Is it scary, they ask, to make laws for people you don't know? Yes, you say honestly, because you're writing for someone else's life. Historians still argue whether royal tutors planted early seeds of ethics or just tried to prevent royal tantrums from becoming national policies. You like to think both. Later, the child draws little figures in the dirt. This one's me, they say, but older, wiser, and still slightly annoying. You smile. The best rulers usually are. They draw another. This is someone who's sad. I want to write laws that make them less sad. And you realize this child, this whirlwind of fig throwing and fake wars and pigeons and hats, might just grow into a decent monarch. Because they're learning the why beneath the rules. Not just the stick and carrot of it all, but the heart of governance. Care disguised as structure. As you prepare to leave, they hand you a scroll. It reads, Article 27. The royal tutor shall be protected from boredom at all times. Signed, me, ruler of slightly organized things. You bow. This is the first time you've been legally appreciated. And frankly, you're not sure whether to frame it or cry. You know something's different the moment you walk in. The room smells better. Not incense, not goat, not the usual wet papyrus and faint despair, but soap. Clean soap. Lemon something. And wait, are those folded tunics? The child sits upright, suspiciously poised, hands neatly placed on their lap, like they've just read a book on etiquette and blackmailed it into obedience. You narrow your eyes. What's happening? They blink. Innocent. Today, I am responsible. You freeze. This is either a trap, a fever dream, or the day you've long feared. Because forbidden rule, number 16. Whenever a royal child says they want to learn economics, cancel your weekend plans and hide your personal goat. They gesture toward the scrolls you brought. Today, I want to know how money works. You sit down, slowly, like someone defusing a fig-shaped bomb. All right, you say, let's talk trade. You start with the basics. Bartering. A cow for grain. Cloth for honey. Fair exchanges. They raise a finger. What if I just take the cow? You smile. Then it's not trade. It's conquest. They nod. Noted. You draw little stick figures on a slate. One farmer, one merchant, one scribe. You demonstrate how coins replaced chickens because, as you gently explain, chickens don't stack well. The child leans in. So money is just belief? You pause. Yes, it's trust. In the coin, in the system, in each other. They look amazed. That's deeply unsettling. You agree. Mainstream historical fact. Egypt's economy operated largely on barter well into the New Kingdom, with grain and labor being more stable than silver or gold coins for centuries. Quirky tidbit. Some workers were paid in beer, up to 4 jugs a day, which frankly explains a lot about pyramid design inconsistencies. You share this. The child is delighted. So, technically, I could pay my guards in pastries. If they accept it, they will. I'll call it the pastry standard. You quickly pivot to supply and demand. You create a fictional market: figs, sandals, decorative fans. You give the child a handful of pretend tokens and say, "You're now a buyer." They immediately try to purchase everything. You raise prices. They frown. "You're evil." "No," you say, "I'm responding to demand." They shout, "Then I demand less." You lower prices. They cheer. Capitalism is amazing. You decide not to correct them yet. Next, taxes. A dangerous topic. You tread lightly. People give a small portion of what they have to the state. In return, the state builds roads, schools, walls. The child nods. And palaces? Sometimes. And cake? Rarely. They pout. Needs revision. You run a simulation. The child is Pharaoh, and you are an extremely nervous merchant with suspiciously low fig output. They demand your tax. You offer a basket of dried plums. They sniff. Are these bribes? No, deductions. They nod thoughtfully. Interesting. Then lean forward and whisper, "Do you pay taxes?" You freeze. "Well, I pay with my peace of mind." They snort. "That sounds fake, but complicated." Exactly. Historians still argue whether royal tutors encouraged fiscal literacy or simply tried to stop their students from declaring war on accountants. You think the latter often. As the day wears on, the child designs a new economy. Currency, tiny portraits of themselves. Bank, a box under their bed. Central Reserve, Fluffy the cat. You attempt to explain inflation. They respond by printing more cat money and offering everyone 1,000 fluff coins. You sigh. That's not how it. Too late. A footman already accepts the fluff coins in exchange for carrying a stool. A new economy has begun. You are now obsolete. You collapse backward on a cushion. The child declares, "I love economics. It's like pretending, but dangerous." You smile. That's exactly what it is. They write one final decree on a parchment. From this day forth, all economic lessons shall include snacks, and no one shall tax me emotionally. You bow. Long may your fluff coins reign. It's Arts and Culture Day. You know this because the child is wearing a melon on their head and demanding to be addressed as theatrical excellence, master of drama, first of their line. You do not blink. You have seen worse. Remember the olive oil interpretive dance? You do. Your sandals never recovered. Today, they announce, we explore the soul. You nod. Through the medium of fruit? Through everything, they declare, arms spread, melon wobbling dangerously. Art, music, mysterious sighs, because forbidden rule number 17. Never discourage royal expression, even if it involves 14 flutes and one deeply confused goat. You settle into your cushion and begin. In ancient times, the arts weren't just for fun, they were sacred, ritual. They told stories, kept history, and shaped belief. They nod solemnly, then hiccup, then declare the hiccup was part of the piece. You decide to start with music. You bring out a sistrum, a sort of sacred rattle used in temple ceremonies, and demonstrate. You rattle gently. They rattle furiously. That's chaos, you say. That's jazz, they say. You transition to poetry. You read a few lines from a classic hymn. O sun that rises with golden breath, bring warmth to limbs and sleep to death. The child nods, impressed. I shall write a love poem. They do. It goes, O fish of the river, your scales are like knives. I want to kiss you, but you bite. You give it 5 stars for honesty. Mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian art and performance were often tied to religion and ceremony. Even dances had prescribed meanings. It was storytelling with purpose. Quirky tidbit. One popular ceremonial dance involved pretending to be a papyrus reed in the wind. Dignitaries often joined in. Dignity was optional. You demonstrate this dance. The child joins. You both sway. A servant walks in, blinks, and leaves immediately. Next comes theater. You provide masks. One happy, one sad, one confused, crafted in your spare time. They choose the confused one. Naturally, you act out a scene, the story of the starving crocodile who learned to share. It features you as the crocodile, mostly growling, the child as the fish with a dream, several props that did not survive the experience. It ends in hugs and a treaty made of leaves. The child claps. That was powerful. I need a stage name. You suggest Radiant Flame of Interpretive Longing. They beam. Perfect. You shift the topic to visual art. They try painting, then decide smearing is better. Soon there is a mural. Technically, a war between the sun and three onions. You say it's metaphorical. They say it's onion propaganda. Historians still argue whether arts training helped royal children become empathetic rulers or just made them stranger in more creative ways. You lean toward both. After lunch, grapes served on a paint smeared tablet, the child grows quiet. They stare at their fish poem, then at the sunlit floor, then whisper, "Do you think art makes people understand each other better?" You nod. It opens a window. Even when the room is locked, they smile, a little sad. Sometimes I wish I were just a poet. You can be, you say, even while being ruler. Can I make laws that rhyme? Please do. You end the day with a ritual you've invented, the ceremony of the muses. It involves soft drumming, a whispered vow to beauty, and reciting one line of whatever truth the heart knows. You say, even silence can be a story. They say, I'm not weird, I'm layered. You bow. And that is the highest form of royalty. As they leave, they whisper, tomorrow I want to build something, something real. And for once, they don't mean a throne made of figs. You arrive the next morning to a peculiar sound, silence, punctuated only by the occasional grunt and what can only be described as the dull thud of architecture being invented poorly. You enter the courtyard and behold the scene. The child, draped in a measuring rope and wielding a crooked reed stylus, is surrounded by bricks, mud, three broken stools, and a blueprint that looks suspiciously like a treasure map drawn by a caffeinated goat. They grin. Today, we build. You blink. Build what? They gesture to the chaos. Legacy. Ah, forbidden rule number 18. When a royal child demands to build something permanent, prepare for impermanence, emotional upheaval, and at least one minor flood. You roll up your sleeves. Then let's begin. You start with foundations, literal and metaphorical. You draw a line in the dirt and explain how real builders begin with the land. Is it solid? Is it ready to hold weight? The child nods and shouts, this patch is emotionally available. You move on. You introduce tools, some real, some carved from imagination. You explain how pulleys and levers can move the heavy things, how angles matter, how structure beats size. They promptly ignore half of that and decide to construct a hall of mirrors and nap stations. You pivot. Let's talk monuments. Mainstream historical fact. Pharaohs often commissioned grand temples and obelisks not just as tombs or places of worship, but as symbols of divine authority. Many were inscribed with exaggerated accounts of their greatness. Shocking, really. Quirky tidbit. One lesser known king built a massive statue of himself. with ears 3 times the normal size. The inscription read, "So all may know I am always listening." His advisors reportedly hated it. You tell this story. The child howls. My statue will have enormous feet, so people know I'm grounded. They spend the next hour drawing blueprints for a pyramid with a snack bar, a public bath shaped like a cat, a bridge that goes nowhere but looks excellent. You introduce the idea of legacy through design, that rulers often left behind more in stone than in scrolls. The child grows quiet. Do people remember buildings? You nod. Sometimes more than names. They frown. But names fade. You nod again. Unless they're carved well. So you practice carving. You teach them how stonemasons chisel with patience, that each letter is a commitment. They try to write their name and accidentally create a new hieroglyph that may or may not mean potato. You don't correct it. It's honestly quite moving. Next, you teach about urban planning. They ask, "What's that?" You explain, "It's making space for people to live, not just to worship you." They pause. So, roads that lead to bread, not just statues of me holding bread? Exactly. They redraw their city, add schools, a well, a place for old people to nap, a place for cats to judge you silently. They're thinking differently now. Less sparkle, more soul. Historians still argue whether royal children grasped the public utility of architecture or simply used monuments to outshine their ancestors. You think both things can be true, and often are, in the same stone. You end the day by stacking stones into a modest arch. Nothing huge, just tall enough for the child to walk beneath and feel it. They do. And then whisper, "It's not big." "No," you say, "but it's real." They nod. I want people to build under this someday. Not just look at it, live under it. You feel something shift in them. They're starting to understand the difference between being remembered and being useful. Later that night, they write a decree. Let no ruler forget that bricks are just hardened promises. You look up at the stars, backlit by a half built wall, and the sounds of quiet dreaming. Legacy indeed. Tonight's lesson begins not with scrolls or speeches, but with a single question whispered in the dark. Do people really remember what you felt like? You turn slowly. The child stands beside a flickering oil lamp, the light softening, their sharp little silhouette. Gone are the props, the robes, the absurd headpieces. Just a child now, wide-eyed, barefoot, thinking. Or do they just remember what you did? You inhale. Because forbidden rule number 19. When the student starts asking the questions you were afraid to answer, you stop teaching and start listening. You motion for them to sit. They curl up beside you like a thoughtful cat. Tonight, you say, we explore memory, the soft, strange kingdom of what lasts. You begin with stories, not facts, not treaties, not laws, just stories. You tell them of Senenmut, the humble architect who designed wonders for Queen Hatshepsut and vanished without a known tomb, of Imhotep, remembered for healing more than building, of countless scribes, nameless in stone, who made others eternal. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians believed memory was a kind of immortality, that to speak a name was to keep a soul alive. Quirky tidbit. Some tombs included statues of servants holding small placards that said, essentially, "Please say my name," even by accident. The child listens, knees pulled to chest. They murmur, "So if people forget you, do you disappear?" You say, "Only if you never made anyone feel something." They blink. "I want to be remembered for making people laugh." "I'll then laugh," you say, "and make sure they're laughing too." You turn the lesson inward, ask, "What do you remember?" They answer slowly, The day you made them a crown from leftover scroll bindings. The time you pretended to be a donkey just so they'd try public speaking. The way you never flinched when they got emotional over a spider. You nod. Then maybe legacy is made of moments. Not monuments, not decrees, not fluff coin. Moments. They scribble in the dirt with a stick. Memory is soft but heavy. You both watch the line fade slowly under the evening breeze. Then you ask, what should people feel when they think of you? They don't answer right away. Then, safe, maybe slightly amused, and a little curious, you grin. That's an excellent national anthem. They giggle, then go quiet again. You ask if they want to write their funerary text, not as a morbid exercise, but as tradition. Egyptians believed it helped align the heart. They nod. You provide papyrus. They think, then write, I was mostly kind, sometimes loud. I saw people. I changed a few things. Also, I had excellent taste in sandals. You read it aloud slowly, like a lullaby. They nudge your shoulder. What would yours say? You think. Then reply, he listened and gave very strange advice. But it worked. They nod approvingly. Historians still argue whether royal tutors ever truly bonded with their pupils or simply played their role. But moments like this, the quiet ones, they say otherwise. The child asks, will you remember me? You turn. Always. They smile, then whisper, even if I make terrible laws one day? You smile wider. Especially then, you rise together and step outside. The stars are out. The kind that blink slowly, as if they too are remembering something. The child looks up. I want to write on the sky. You whisper, you already are. And in that moment, the weight of dynasties, of duty, of divine right, all of it feels small, manageable, even funny, because memory isn't about statues. It's about standing beside someone in silence and knowing they saw you, not the crown, not the title, you. And maybe that's enough. Morning arrives quiet, not silent, but softer, as if the palace itself is exhaling, letting go of a very long breath it didn't know it was holding. You walk the familiar corridor, no scrolls in hand, no elaborate lessons planned. Today feels different, and it is, because today is your last day. You enter the chamber and find the child, now nearly a shadow taller than when you met them, standing by the window, watching dust dance in a sunbeam. They turn. No title, no crown, just that face you've come to know. Part mischief, part wonder, part, please don't make me conjugate verbs. They smile. I don't want a lesson today. You nod. I wasn't going to give one. Instead, you sit. They sit beside you, like always, and for a while, you both just listen to the rustle of palm trees, the distant laughter of servants, a far-off flute tuning itself for no reason at all. Finally, they speak. I've been thinking. You arch an eyebrow. Dangerous habit. They ignore you. About all the rules you never wrote down. The ones between the scrolls. Like how to say no without sounding cruel. How to wait. How to not eat all the dates before offering some to others. You nod slowly. The forbidden rules. They grin. Exactly. You ask, which one will you remember most? They think, then whisper, the one where you said, it's okay to not know what kind of ruler I want to be yet. You smile. It's not just okay, it's necessary. Mainstream historical fact. Many rulers spent the early years of their reigns experimenting, failing, learning, not just from advisors, but from memories of tutors long gone. Quirky tidbit. One pharaoh famously passed a law he didn't understand. revoked it a week later, and then declared that week a national holiday. People still celebrate it with jokes and questionable pastries. You tell this story. The child laughs. That's exactly what I do. Then they grow quiet again. I'm scared, they say. Good, you reply. That means you're not a tyrant yet. They chuckle. Yet, you pull from your robe a small scroll. Blank. What's this? Your first real decree, you say. One no one sees but you. They take it, run their fingers across its smoothness. And write, I will try. Every day, even when it's boring, I will notice people. I will ask questions. And I will never, ever make my tutor wear wool in the summer again. You laugh. A wise start. They ask, what happens to tutors when they leave? You reply, we vanish. Into stories, into old jokes, into the background of history. They frown. That doesn't seem fair. Tutors don't need statues, you say. We build the people who build the statues. They whisper, but I'll remember you. And you believe them. Historians still argue whether royal tutors shaped empires or merely survived them. But you know, you shaped this one. As you prepare to go, they hand you something, a folded papyrus. Inside, a drawing. It's crude, wobbly, but unmistakable. It's you, not in robes, not with scrolls. Just sitting, listening, smiling. And above it, in uneven ink, the one who made me think. You swallow, then stand. They hug you, not as student to teacher, but as one soul to another. You leave. And as the door closes behind you, you hear them mutter, I'm going to be weird, but hopefully useful. You smile, perfect, and now, let it all fade. Let the palace dim in your mind. The echo of sandals on stone, the rustle of papyrus, the soft exhale of a courtyard tree swaying beneath the stars. Let the voice of that strange bright child dissolve into whispers and old laughter. Let the scrolls unroll and curl again, quietly, like a cat finding sleep. You've walked the halls. You've heard the forbidden rules. You've sat through lessons of figs, of fish poetry, of fluff coins and emotional turnips. You've seen a future ruler grow, not just in height, but in softness, in sight. So now drift back. No need to hold any of it tightly. Let the pyramid plans crumble, the goat economy collapse, the performance art wither into a dusty stage. They were never meant to last. Only the feeling remains that somewhere in some sunlit world, a child became a ruler because someone chose to teach with humor, with patience, with fig-based metaphors. Let that feeling hold you. Let it be warm. Let it be slow. Sleep is not a failure of thought. It's the final lesson, the softest one. So breathe. Breathe again. And if tomorrow you wake and remember nothing of this story, that's all right. The best tutors vanish into the students who remember how to listen. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.